On September 11th, 2001, the world was changed forever.
We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day.
That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
Thousands of families grieved their losses.
The unthinkable happened today. The World Trade Center, both towers, gone, and we are all witnesses to it, and to some degree we are all victims.
And the entire world was shaken by the day's events. On that day, a hatred was born. There was no understanding of the differences between the Islamist militants behind the attacks and everyday people just living their lives. Many Americans sought revenge, with some overzealous individuals going so far as to attack those they believed to be guilty, all in the name of patriotism. This story will look at one such individual and one victim. This is the 9/11 victim killed in Mesa, Arizona. Welcome and thank you for joining me. The story I have for you this evening is one of murder. We'll be taking a look at some of the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks and the impact on one particular victim. It may sound impossible for a person in Arizona to fall victim to the 9/11 attacks in New York and Washington, over 2,000 miles away. This incident is separate but wholly related and caused by the events of 9/11. As tensions rose in the days following, many citizens found themselves the targets of hate crimes, not because they supported the 9/11 attacks, not because they were part of Al-Qaeda, not even because they were ethnically Arab or practicing Muslims, but because they were different, because they wore turbans, because they had beards, because people didn't know the difference between an Arab Muslim and an Indian Sikh. Today we'll be looking at the murder of Balbir Singh Sodhi. In 1989, at around 20 years old, Balbir Singh Sodhi emigrated to the United States along with his two brothers. Balbir and his family were Sikhs from Punjab, a state in northern India. He began working as a computer engineer and analyst at HP, initially residing in Los Angeles. In the years following, he and his brothers would save enough money to buy a gas station and several affiliated franchises out in Phoenix, Arizona, and so relocated to the city of Mesa. Fast forward a decade or so to September 11th, 2001, to the most infamous terrorist attacks in history. Tensions were high in the following days and fingers were being pointed in all directions at innocent people. According to the FBI, hate crimes against Muslims spiked significantly following the 9/11 attacks, jumping from 28 incidents in 2000 to 481 incidents in 2001. These incidents did reduce in the following years. However, their frequency has remained around 4 times higher than it was in the year 2000, even to this day. It's clear that the attacks orchestrated by Al-Qaeda gave many Americans a bad impression of Muslims. To make matters worse, many people were ignorant of the differences between Muslims and other religions. One of those people is Silva Roque from Alabama. Roque, aged 42 at the time, was an aircraft mechanic with a less than savoury past. He held a criminal record for an attempted robbery in California and was described by his colleagues as narrow-minded, with a hatred for both immigrants and Arabs. On September 11th, 2001, Roque interacted with a waiter at a local Applebee's, where he stated his intentions to shoot some Arab Muslims and even their children. The direct quote from Roque shows that he may have identified people as Muslims based solely on their turbans, despite being worn by many religions worldwide, including Christianity and Sikhism. 4 days later, on September 15th, 2001, Roque was seen at the Wild Hare Sports Bar in Mesa, Arizona, where he was ranting about immigrants. He then left the bar and got into his Chevrolet S10 pickup truck and drove out to a local gas station. That gas station was the Chevron owned by Balbir Singh Sodhi. Outside the gas station, Sodhi was planting flowers with the help of a landscaper, innocently minding his own business and making his gas station a nicer place. Roque pulled up his truck and, without even exiting the vehicle, shot Sodhi 5 times with a .380 handgun and killing him. Roque had shot the man for no reason other than believing he was an Arab Muslim, based on his clothes, his turban and his beard. Speeding away from the Chevron, Roque drove his truck 10 miles away to a mobile gas station. It was here, just 20 minutes after killing Balbir Singh Sodhi, that Frank Roque took aim at another innocent man. He shot at the Lebanese-American clerk, but missed, fortunately. Seemingly maddened by rage under the guise of patriotism, Roque then drove out to his former residence, which had been purchased by a local Afghan family. He fired multiple rounds at the outside of the house before fleeing. He reportedly then went to another local bar, where he boasted about the police investigating the murder he had just committed. The following day, on September 15, 2001, Roque was arrested. He reportedly shouted slogans such as "I am a patriot" and "I stand for America all the way" during his arrest. His bail was set at $1 million. It would take nearly 2 years before the trial of Frank Roque would commence, beginning on August 18, 2003. The defense attorneys argued that Roque had suffered an episode of temporary insanity triggered by the events of 9/11. He was stated to have struggled with mental illness for most of his life, and the episode brought on voices that told him to kill the devils. Roque's family testified that he had endured a difficult childhood with a physically abusive father and schizophrenic mother. His brother Howard spoke to him on the phone the day of the shootings, stating it was obvious that Frank was not stable. He was quoted as talking of the devil, voices in his head, and believing his head was about to explode. However, a court-appointed psychiatrist testified that Roque could very well distinguish between right and wrong, and so the insanity plea was rejected. On September 30th, 2003, Frank Roque was found guilty of first-degree murder, with his death sentence being handed down just 9 days later. Whilst on death row, Roque would be found guilty of further offences. In July 2005, he was found guilty of an unspecified conspiracy charge, detailed only as a violent crime. In February 2006, he was found guilty of having manufactured a primitive weapon in prison. However, despite these additional charges and behaviour, in August 2006, the Arizona Supreme Court changed his death sentence to a sentence of life in prison without parole. The reasoning for this was his low IQ and mental illness. In 2016, journalist Valerie Kaur would meet with Rana Sodhi, one of Balbir's brothers. She would attend the annual memorial at the Chevron gas station and speak to Rana about the experience. As part of this, they spoke with Frank Roque over the telephone. Roque expressed remorse for killing Balbir Singh Sodhi. However, his apologies were not entirely satisfying. Roque did not take responsibility, insisting that he did not murder another man intentionally, and throughout their conversation, he could not talk of Balbir's murder without also mentioning the effect it's had on him, his family, and those who lost their lives in 9/11. In the end, this was a very cut and dry case. There was no mystery, there was no long, drawn-out investigation. This was very simply a hate crime committed against a man who had done nothing wrong and had no affiliation with the group responsible for the 9/11 attacks, or even the religion they followed. What are your thoughts on the sentencing handed down to Frank Roque? Should his death sentence have been upheld? He declared his intentions, murdered an innocent man in broad daylight, and bragged about it afterwards. And what of his response in 2016? Do you believe he is truly remorseful, considering how he referenced the victims of 9/11 and his own family whilst apologising for the murder of Balbir Singh Sodhi? Regardless, it looks like Frank Roque will live out the rest of his life in an Arizona prison with no chance of getting out. Thank you for joining me for this story of murder. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Until next time.